headwaters of the Jordan, these underground springs, are at three places called Dan, Philippi,
Descendant.
or Banias. Banias is the same thing, and Hezboni. Okay, we're not really going to Hezboni, but we're going to go to Dan and Caesarea Philippi. So why was there a town here? Why was Dan here? Why was there people living here?
Water.
You think so? Did you see that water, everybody? Man, that is some serious water, isn't it? In a desert country, you know, that is probably 60 or 70% desert. And then to see water like that, do you think you would live here? Do you think you would enjoy that water? Now, water for your farms, water for your animals, water for your children, water for life, and there's plenty of it. It's never going to run out, is it? Right here, anyway. So where the water is, unfortunately, is also where the gods are. And do you think that people would ever be tempted, when you see water like that, to maybe worship it?
Absolutely.
To make a god out of it, to bow down to it, and then to create all kinds of rituals and cultic practices around the worship of water and the water gods. Oh, you bet. And that's what's going on here. All right, this is an evil place. So do you know how fertility cults worked in Canaan with the Canaanites? So the Canaanites were farmers, and they were living here before the Israelites got here. So how did the fertility cults work? Well, first of all, the Canaanites had gods. So the Canaanites had a water god, and his name was, well, not yet. And that's next place. The Canaanites had a water god. His name was Baal, or Baal. And Baal was a good-looking guy. He was virile. He was strong. He was a handsome, worth-worshiping guy. Baal. And of course, these gods all had female consorts, right? And this was about, sexuality. So Baal and Asherah. Remember we talked in Arad, there were some inscriptions found Yahweh in his Asherah. And so they gave Yahweh a female consort, right? Which that was syncretism, that was wrong. But Baal and Asherah. So the water gods, in the sort of right this time of year, March, April, May, would go into the underworld. They would go down into the ground, into the watery, dark underworld. And then in November, December, the gods would come back up and in a way rise from the dead and come back to life. And when they came back up from that watery underworld, the water gods would bring water. And so it would rain in November, December, January, February. And then they would die again in April, May, go back to that watery underworld, and then come back again. So it's the dying and rising God. The dying and rising God who comes back and gives life and water. You see the connections? I don't have time to make them. You make them. You got it. All right? So in order to encourage Baal and Asherah and the water to come back and the fertility to take place and for the animals to thrive and for the crops to grow and for babies to be born, in order to encourage Baal and Asherah to do their thing, what would the people do?
Have sex.
Yeah. Because when Baal and Asherah would have sexual intercourse, that's when the fertility would come. That was all wrapped up with that, right? And so the priests and the priestesses of Baal and Asherah in the cult shrine, the temple shrine, the temples of Baal, which were all over the place for the Canaanites, the part of the cultic practices would be to have sex and sexual relations, encouraging Baal and Asherah to do the same thing so that the water and the fertility would come. Are y'all following this? Okay, the most disgusting, degrading things that you can imagine were going on around the worship of Baal. part of that too, and we'll get to this more later in the trip when we go to Megiddo. I'll show you something there that's really disgusting. But part of all of the worship of Baal and the encouragement to produce fertility was to also offer Baal and Asherah an offering. Of what? Children, babies. And they would offer babies as sacrifices. And they would engage in sexual relations to encourage the fertility. I mean, just the sort of the perversion of two of God's most beautiful gifts. Life, birth, babies, and the sexual relationship between husband and wife and family, right? Two beautiful gifts that God gives, and the Canaanites perverted those and just engaged in those disgusting practices. Now remember, the Israelites' roots are where? So when they come here, when the Israelites come here, where had there been rootsmen? Where did they come from? Where did they sort of, what was their story? They came from the desert. They were desert people. We talked about that in the desert, right? Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and they learned to trust God in the desert as a shepherd, for water, for food, for life, for provision. That's where they learned who they were and who they were with God. Now, when they get here to Canaan, the Israelites, when they get here to Canaan, and they become farmers. Now, shepherds and farmers, a land of shepherds and farmers. When the Israelites become farmers, do you think that they would at all be attracted to the practices of the Canaanites involved with Baal and the water? Of course they would. Mm-hmm. So when they go to when the Israelites go to the Rainbow Grill in Granville for breakfast, where all business deals take place and things get settled, and they go down there and they're talking amongst each other with the Canaanites. Yeah, so how does the farming work here? We just got here. We've been in the desert, now we're here, we want to plant our crops, we want to grow our food. How does it work? Oh, glad you asked, said the Canaanites. Here's the secret. We got this guy. Oh, he's wonderful. His name is Baal. He's a great God. You talk about the water that he provides, wonderful. And then this female, Asherah, and this is what you got to do. You come to the Baal shrine, the temple of Baal, and then you engage in some of the practices there, and then your fields, your crops will thrive and grow. So basically, half of the work of farming was actually planting the field and harvesting your crops and doing what farmers do. The other half of your job was to engage in the cultic practices of Baal and Asherah at the temple. Can you imagine? You would give your daughters to it. You go, help the family out. And this is what they would engage in. Disgusting. Water gushing up from the earth, from the underworld. And Dan, this is ground zero for water, became a pagan city. And then the Israelites came here and they got wrapped up in it, and it became a pagan bunch of people. For the God's plan was that remember what he told them in Deuteronomy? In Deuteronomy, when they came in here, Moses says, don't you dare reduplicate the practices of the Canaanites. Don't you engage in any of that stuff, the child sacrifice. Don't do it. Don't you dare do it. And what happened when they got here? They did it. All of it. And they were supposed to be the ones that influenced the Canaanites and impacted them with the story of Yahweh and a God of liberation and freedom, and instead it was the Israelites who were impacted by the Canaanite story. Imagine that. Cultural assimilation to the culture that you live in. Apparently that was a problem back then. Mm-hmm. And we don't, apparently they struggled with that. But yeah. So let me tell you about the story just real quick. I'm going to give you 3 quick periods of history about this place, and then we'll move on. Okay, the first period is the period of my people, the tribe of Dan. There were 12 tribes, and one of them was the tribe of Dan. So they allotted the portions of land, and they all got their little inheritance. They all got their piece, all the way from the Hashvalah in the south, all the way up to the Judean mountains, all the way up here. Even there were some allotments on the eastern side of the Jordan River, Manasseh, and it was over there, and so they all had their piece of property and their inheritance, which they were to use in their redemptive purpose to serve God, right? So the Danites, where were they? Where was their allotment? Where was their inheritance first given? I'm not going to read this in Joshua chapter 19. verse 47. But where was the Danites' inheritance? You know? Okay. Well, maybe you should read it. Maybe we should all read it. But
East of the Jordan?
no. Good guess, Granny. But it was in the Hashphalah. Remember we were in the Hashphalah the first 2 days? Down by Beit Shemesh and Samson territory and all that down in there? That's where they were given. Well, come to happen that the Danites don't like their inheritance. They're not happy with it, they're not satisfied with it, or they want a better piece. I don't know what exactly it was, but they send out a group of people to spy out a better piece of land. Back up for just a minute. There's such, I mean, do you know what maybe the darkest 4 or 5 chapters of the entire Bible are? I mean, there's a lot of sin. There's a lot of darkness. There's a lot of really disgusting stuff going on. Do you know what the 4 darkest chapters are? By far. I mean, there's not even a close second.
Yeah.
Not even a close second. Judges 17, 18, 19, 20, well, and 21. 5 chapters. I dare you to read those chapters. I dare you. I mean, they're horrible. So in Judges 17, this guy named Micah steals some silver from his mom. His mom goes, "Hey, who stole my silver?" And Micah finally says, "Well, I did." And mom says, "Oh, well, that's okay. Tell you what I'll do. I'll make an idol out of that silver, and I'll give it back to you, Micah." And Micah says, "Cool, thanks, Mom. Thought I was going to get in trouble, but you gave me an idol." And then this guy, Micah, goes and hires his own Levitical priest. He says, "Hey, why don't you be my private priest? I got this idol thing going. We're in Canaan. You be my priest. I'll pay you." And he gets an ephod. He gets all this other foreign paraphernalia to go along with the Canaanite worship. He hires his own priest and worships his own idol. This guy named Micah. Are you with me? Now, back to the Danites. So the Danites send out sort of a spying party to spy out a better piece of land. They come up here, and they find this city called Laish. And the Bible describes them as, this is Judges chapter 18. The 5 men left and came to Laish, where they saw the people were living in safety like the Sidonians, unsuspecting and secure. And since their land lacked nothing, they were prosperous. And unsuspecting, innocent people just living here. So the spying party goes back down south and says, "We found a really good spot." And so they gather 600 soldiers and warriors, and they say, "Let's go attack them, and let's take over that land." Those innocent people just living there. You following this story? Okay. But on the way, the 600-member raiding party stops off at this guy Micah's house. Remember Micah? Our idol guy with the silver and his own Levitical priest? They stop off at his house, and they say, they steal his idol. And they start making off with it. And the priest who Micah hired comes after him and says, "Hey, what you guys doing? Stealing the idol. You can't do that." And then the Danites say, "Well, tell you what, Levite, how about if you be our priest? We'll pay you more. And you come be our priest." And Levite says, "Along with the Danites who stole the idol and now stole the priest." And now Micah comes after him and says, "Hey, you guys stole my priest and my idol. What are you doing?" And they said, "Yeah, what are you going to do about it?" I'm just paraphrasing. "Yeah, so what's it to you?" "Oh," says Micah, "it looks like you got 600 warriors." "All right. Let's deal with it." So they take Micah's idol and they take Micah's priest. The Danites do. They come up here and they kill all the people living in this town, and they take over and they start living here. And they worship Yahweh with undivided heart and attention for the rest of their lives. Of course not. You know what happened. They saw the water, they got the Baal, and they just assimilated everything that was going on here. Listen to the conclusion of the story. This is in Judges 18, verse 27. "Then they took what Micah had made and his priest and went on to Laish against a peaceful and unsuspecting people. They attacked them with the sword and burned down their city. There was no one to rescue them because they lived a long way from Sidon and had no relationship with anyone else. The Danites rebuilt the city, and settled there. They named it Dan, after their forefather Dan, who was born to Israel, though the city used to be called Laish. There the Danites set up for themselves the idols. And then get this. And Jonathan, son of Gershom, the son of Moses, and his sons were priests for the tribe of Dan until the time of the captivity of the land. They continued to use the idols Micah had made all the time the house of God was in Shiloh. What do you think about my people?
They suck.
They stink. They're terrible. Idols. But do you know what the kicker is? Did you hear it? Gershom, Jonathan, son of Gershom, son of Moses, served as priests. Moses, grandson. How do you like that? And comes up here and is one of those priests for the tribe of Dan. Did they take a step away from God? Oh, yeah. They took a big fat step, and they abandoned their land, they abandoned their inheritance, and really, they abandoned God and everything he stands for, and the story that they were supposed to represent, and they completely gave in and caved and assimilated to the culture around them, and no longer had an impact on anybody for Yahweh. What a sad story, isn't it? What a sad, sad story. If you go all the way to the end of the Bible, in Revelation chapter 7, there's this picture of the people of God in the new heavens and new earth, and they're symbolized by listing off the tribes, and 12,000 from Judah, and 12,000 from Joseph, and 12,000 from Reuben, and 12,000 from Simeon, and they list, this is symbolic of the people of God, and the 12 tribes are listed, except it's interesting in Revelation 7, do you know which tribe is not listed? Dan. Levi is listed to kind of fill in, and Dan is not listed. I don't know why. Could it be because it goes all the way back to this story and what happened to him in the beginning? That there was such a disgusting, evil reputation with that tribe of Dan that they were basically shunned from the people of God. You know what I mean? They completely lost their identity and walked away. That's stage one. Okay, stage number 2, 1 Kings chapter 12. 1 Kings 12. And a guy by the name of King Jeroboam. Who's King Jeroboam? Who's Jeroboam?
First king of the northern kingdom.
Yeah, he's the first king of the northern kingdom. Remember the kingdom split, right? After David and Solomon, then the northern kingdom has their first king Jeroboam. The southern king has their first king Rehoboam, and then they each have their histories and their kings, right? But Jeroboam is the first king of the north. So this is at the very beginning. So what does he do? Well, he needs to consolidate his kingdom. Everyone has been so far worshiping in Jerusalem. David, Solomon built the temple. There's a whole religious thing going on there. The spirituality is centered in Jerusalem. But now Jeroboam finds himself the king of a territory that does not include Jerusalem. And he's up here in the north. So in order to consolidate his kingdom, this is what he does. 1 Kings 12:26. Jeroboam thought to himself, the kingdom will now likely revert to the house of David. If these people go up to offer sacrifices at the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem, they will again give their allegiance to their lord, Rehoboam, king of Judah. They will kill me and return to King Rehoboam. After seeking advice, the king made 2 golden calves. He said to the people, is it too much for you to go up to Jerusalem? Here are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. One he set up in Bethel, and the other in Dan. And this thing became a sin. Do you think? The people went even as far as Dan to worship one there. He appointed priests. It goes on in the text. He appointed priests. He built a temple shrine to Baal. We're going to go see in just a minute the altar of Jeroboam. They discovered it. It's just up the road a piece. They discovered the altar, and they discovered the foundation of the temple of Baal up there. It is a disgusting, evil, awful place up there. Did Jeroboam step away from Yahweh? He stepped away too. The Danites stepped away first, and then Jeroboam stepped away again. And he led the whole northern kingdom in the worship of Baal and Asherah and all of that stuff. whenever the genealogies are read in First and Second Kings, and the northern kings are evaluated in terms of their spirituality, which, by the way, how many good kings in the north? 0, zippo. And whenever they're evaluated in terms of their spirituality, they are compared, so-and-so did evil in the eyes of the Lord, just like his father. If you're a bad king, you're compared to Jeroboam. Just like Jeroboam, Jeroboam left a legacy of evil and sin and disgusting worship of Baal. That was his legacy. Horrible, isn't it? If you were a good king, you were compared to David. There are a couple of those in the south. So Dan steps away. Jeroboam steps away. But maybe the worst of all of them is yet to come. If you thought the Danites were bad, and you thought Jeroboam was bad, you ain't seen nothing yet. Because we have the dynamic duo of evil and sin in the entire Old Testament yet to come. Their names are Ahab and Jezebel. Ahab and Jezebel. Let me just read the evaluation, the spiritual evaluation of Ahab. This is 1 Kings 16, verse 29. 1 Kings 16, 29. Ahab, son of Omri, became king of Israel, and he reigned in Samaria over Israel 22 years. Ahab, son of Omri, did more evil in the eyes of the Lord than any of those before him. He not only considered it trivial to commit the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, but he also married Jezebel, daughter of Ethbaal. Ethbaal, there's the Baal, king of the Sidonians, and began to serve Baal and worship him. He set up an altar for Baal in the temple of Baal that he built in Samaria. Ahab also made an Asherah pole and did more to provoke Yahweh, the God of Israel, to anger than did all the kings of Israel before him. Wow. Ahab and Jezebel, the Danites, away from God. Jeroboam, away from God. Ahab and Jezebel, way away from God. Do you see what's going on here with the leadership? Well, it's not leadership, it's terrible leadership, right? And they're leading the people in irreligious, unspiritual, ungodly, horrible practices, debasing the gifts of God, serving Canaanite gods, engaging in horrible practices, and leaving a legacy of evil. And that's what this place is known for. This is a horrible place, everybody. This is an evil place. We're sitting in the gate area. I mean, it was a strong and mighty place. But this place also felt the consequences of that sin. Because when God would judge his people Israel, where would the enemies come from? From the north. Babylon, Assyria. And this would be one of the first places they hit, right? Right here. In fact, and I'll end with this. One of the top 10 archaeological finds of all time. Dead Sea Scrolls at the top, and then there's like in the top 10 is something called the Tel Dan stele. The Tel Dan stele. It was found here at Tel Dan in 1993. So exactly 30 years ago right now, called the Tel Dan stele. And the Tel Dan stele, there's always controversy about who wrote it. It's a monument that was put up by one of the kings from Syria who came and destroyed this place. There's debate exactly which king, but it seems like the consensus now that it was written by the Syrian king named Hazael. Hazael is actually mentioned in the Old Testament. Hazael, a Syrian king, or called Aramean, from Aram. That's Syria. Same thing. So Hazael, the Syrian king, puts up this monument, and part of the monument reads, I killed this person, I killed that person, I killed that person on my military campaign. And then it says, I killed Jehoram, son of Ahab. And I also killed Joram of the Beit David, house of David. this is an extraordinary find because what it is, it's one of the first, earliest extra-biblical references to King David on a monument, that he's a real person, that there was a real kingdom, that they were a real threat, and that it was a real nation. Right? I thought, because you know how scholars go with history and stuff. They say King David is about as real as King Arthur. It's a story. And all of a sudden we start finding stuff like the Tel Dan stele, and it mentions the house of David. That is, I believe, that is extraordinary, isn't it? They actually found it. They didn't excavate it in its primary use, which is as a monument, but they actually discovered it in its secondary use, which means that it was a monument that then the city was later destroyed, and that monument was actually, the stone was used as part of the wall. So they actually found it in the wall around the corner over there. And then they found it and said, oh, this goes back to a monument and all of that, and it mentions the house of David. That's pretty cool, huh? Mm-hmm. So this place, I think, reminds us of the consequences that come when we step away from God. Serious consequences. You know, we live in a world very similar, right? The water, sexual perversion, child sacrifice, all the attractions of a modern culture, a city that had everything, you know, a freezer full of beef and water that never stops. We have that, don't we? And so we think, well, one small sin, it won't matter. It won't matter. You know, just one, it won't matter. I can fix it later. It's okay. You know, I'm sophisticated enough that I can believe in God and advance the kingdom of God and just do this one thing. It won't matter. If I just click on this, it won't matter. If I just go to that one, it won't matter. If I go to that, if I hang with those people, it won't matter. It's just one little thing. I'll fix it later. And what happens is you know what happens. One sin leads to another sin, leads to another sin, and pretty soon you're so far off the path of God, you don't even know where it is anymore. You can't get back on it. So I don't know, what steps you need to avoid in order to stay on the path, because you've been given an inheritance too. We all have. A little place where God has given us that we can use for His redemptive purpose, with the gifts that He's given us to impact the people around us. And if we say that we don't want that, that we want to go somewhere else and do something else, and then just step, and pretty soon, God is so far away, He doesn't matter anymore. See what I mean? And maybe we're thinking we're not as stupid as the Danites. We would never do anything like, Jeroboam or Ahab and Jezebel, right? By the way, y'all people sitting over there on those steps, those are original steps from 850 BC. You see the little cylinder things around you there? Those are probably foundations that would hold pillars for a canopy. And this is the gate area. Who sits in the gate area? The king, or the rich people, the king. There's evidence that on that step, under that canopy, sat Ahab and Jezebel. Those are original steps. Ahab and Jezebel. You see these 5 stones here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What are those? Standing stones to Baal and Asherah. I mean, the Israelites used stones too. Everybody did. And these are standing stones to Baal and Asherah, Ahab and Jezebel. Are you with me? So, a terrible place, an evil place, a legacy of destruction, and not a place that we want to be associated with, right? All right, that was longer than I thought. Any quick comments or thoughts before we have to move on to see if we're going to go see the altar? We're going to see the Baal temple.